Oh, there she is. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I think you're on mute, Tina.
Oh dear. Yeah, no, I've just been on one at 12 o'clock, so I suddenly thought, why doesn't this work? I've just been on one.
All right.
Never mind.
Okay,
Right.
so I'll hand straight over to you, Tina. You'll be able to share your presentation, and then we will sort of have a conversation afterwards, which we're going to have in the hopes that you would sort of be able to get through. But over to you, Tina.
Right, let me just find my screens and everything else. So just bear with me while I get this up and running. Try and find the right screen now. Which is why I wanted to do this beforehand, but it wouldn't let me in. Hopefully share it and start it. Hopefully it will then come up for you guys. Right, that in presentation mode. How's that?
Excellent.
Right, and I can still see you because I've got you in the little window and I know what I'm doing. Right. Welcome everybody, and apologies for delaying everything, but welcome to this session, and hopefully I will give you some interesting information to think about. And obviously if you want to find some other information out, you can either contact me or Emma. So I will start with what I was going to cover, which after a conversation with Ebenezer, we thought we'd start off with some basics. Waste duty of care. This is one of our fundamental pieces of regulation in the waste sector. As you can see there, it's very much a building block. It is the base. Once you get this right, you can get anything else that follows right as well. So you have to get duty of care right to make sure that everything else that you do in relation to waste, recycling, disposal works and you're compliant. It is a regulation. So if you do breach duty of care, section 34 of the EPA, you are effectively carrying out a criminal offence and you can be prosecuted. And there are a different set of ranges for that, depending on whether you're an individual or whether you're an organisation. But it can be quite key to sort of how you get, what the prosecution level can be, and it obviously does depend on what you've done. It also, under duty of care, is local authorities have the responsibility to check businesses and that there is a waste contract in place. So you may get a visit from a local authority that comes along and asks you where your waste is going and what process you're using for that, and whether you've got an operator and who that is, and is everything working as it should be. So they do check. So let's give you the background. Duty of care, as I said, it's section 34 of the EPA. It's been around for a very long time. It's very little known by some organisations. It shouldn't be, but it does appear to have been one of those that still slips underneath the mat and hides away. It has been updated. There are a number of amendments. Some of them are actually quite minor, but basically what came in 1991, when they updated it, you then had to basically sign your paperwork. So you couldn't sign it about 4 or 5 days later. So, because we always had an issue with people were sort of moving waste, but they weren't actually signing the paperwork. And then once a regulator came along and sort of said, can you show me your completed paperwork? They go, oh, and then they'd fill it out and sign it. So basically they filled that loophole. And then in 2005, it basically became a requirement for householders to follow out duty of care a bit more stringently. So basically, if you're a householder and you decide to hire a skip, for example, you should check that the company you are hiring that skip from actually fulfills the requirements for duty of care. So you are basically giving it to a registered carrier. And then 2011, there was another update, which basically means you have to take account of the waste hierarchy and make a declaration of this on the paperwork. More recently, it's been consulted on last year to update carriers, brokers and dealers, which carrier is the person you hand your waste to under duty of care. Brokers and dealers are those that can work on your behalf to find somebody to take the waste away for you. So some of you as a larger organisation may actually be using brokers and dealers. Dealers is more in relation to waste that perhaps is being exported. So if you've got some recyclables that need to go somewhere else, dealers may be more than brokers, but you can end up with a relationship that anybody who is registered can be a carrier, broker and a dealer. So you be aware, and you do need to know that they are registered, and you should check that as part of your duty of care. So what are the key sections? You basically have to describe your waste. So it's not just a case of rubbish. You can't just say muck if it's soil. You have to basically specify what that is in a reasonable description. So if it's dry recyclables, you might put dry recyclables consisting of paper, plastic and cans. You then have to give it a EWC code, which is a European Waste Catalogue number. It's a 3-digit description. That has to be part of the paperwork. Again, you also as a business have to check that you are using registered carriers, brokers and dealers, and you also have to ensure that where your waste is going to, so your carrier or your broker who specifies the collection and removal, is taking it to a permitted and exempt site. It's something you should check. You should basically ask the person who is doing this for you for their paperwork. If they don't want to supply it, I'd kind of ask why, because they're obviously trying to hide something. Anybody that is fulfilling duty of care should very easily offer you the paperwork to show they're registered and actually it's going to a permitted or exempt site. The transfer or information note has to have all this information on it. It has to be signed by your carrier, broker or dealer, or depending on how many you use. And it also then is obviously signed by the accepting site, so the permitted and exempt site then does its sort of signature. You may not see that bit, but you should get a copy of this particular note that shows you that that transaction has taken place. There is obviously more detail in relation to whether it's a single transaction or what we call a I've forgotten the word now. I'm just trying to rethink what the word was. It's basically a note that's set in place, so you end up, if you don't change only your waste description, it's one note that stays, so you don't have to have one for each transaction. I've forgotten the word. That's just very poor, isn't it? But obviously there is a lot more detail to this. I'm just giving you an overview to duty of care so that you at least think about whether you're actually compliant and understand what your requirements are. So the next slide to me, I think, is quite an interesting one. I've put this down as the 3 R's. We seem to like R's in waste and resources. So do you know what your right waste is? Does that right waste go to the right person? And does that right person take it to the right place? I think this is quite key. So if you don't know what waste you have as a producer, you don't know who you're giving it to and whether they're actually registered under duty of care, and you're certainly not sure where it's going, then I say you're not compliant with duty of care. So it's something you really do need to talk about, think about, and consider what you need to put in place. So as a producer, you need to know your waste. You need to know what you've got, whether it's hazardous, non-hazardous, whether it needs to be treated particularly carefully. Does it need to be packaged particularly to be transported? You should know all of this before you embark on transporting it and disposing of it. You can use your operator. You can ask the operator that you engage to do this, or your broker, to help you understand the requirements. But at least if you know what you need to do, you at least then can determine whether they're telling you the correct information. So it's always good. It's a double check, because if you don't and the regulator comes to find you once this waste turns up somewhere and you say, well, I just left it to my operator, that's not good enough. They will not accept that as a reason for you not knowing. You need to know the hierarchy, because part of the declaration states that you've thought about whether this material that you've got as waste can be reused, can be recycled, or does it have to go for final disposal? And then where is that? Is it landfill or is it energy from waste? Obviously, the whole idea of the hierarchy is to move it away from final disposal, but not all wastes can be recycled. So you do need to know where you can put some materials, because you have to sign that declaration to say, yes, I have thought about the waste hierarchy. Segregation is very key, especially as the second part of the presentation I'm going to talk to you about in relation to simpler recycling policy changes. Segregation is key anyway for hazardous and non-hazardous waste. You cannot mix them. There are obviously other materials that you shouldn't keep together, and obviously the whole point of segregation is easier for collection And it also enables you to understand what you've got and enable you to then maybe think about what it's costing you to dispose of these materials if you have to dispose of them. Hazardous waste to get rid of and dispose of is a lot more expensive than non-hazardous waste. Not everybody will have it, but those that do obviously try and segregate it to an absolute minimum because of the cost potential. Your responsibility, as I said before, you do need to know who your carrier is. You do need to know whether they're registered, and again, the end destination. You also have a requirement to keep your paperwork for at least 2 years and have it available, so that if, for example, there is an issue and the agency or the environmental regulator, depending on where your office is based, comes and asks you to look at your waste transfer note stroke information note, you have it accessible and they can see it. They have a duty to do that, and it's something you can't refuse. If you do, they become very suspicious. So I wouldn't recommend it as a no. So that's a quick whizzle through duty of care. Here I've given you some links on. I think I'm not sure whether I've seen there's a bit Ebenezer is going to circulate these, but these basically give you some links to the duty of care itself, the legislation, so you can at least try and understand what those changes are, or what those changes might mean if you're not already aware of them. And I've also included the statutory guidance. So there is statutory guidance for waste duty of care, and because it's statutory, it is taken into account whenever there is a prosecution. So it's not just the legislation that you could fall foul of if you breach, it could also be the statutory guidance. So consequently, you need to understand what the guidance is asking you to do. And obviously the guidance puts in more simpler words the requirements under the legislation. I've also included Right Waste, Right Place, which was a campaign that CIWM and the Environmental Services Association, which is the trade body for waste operators, put together to help small businesses and others understand what duty of care is in a sort of in a user-friendly way, instead of reams of legislation and statutory guidance. So again, it's a useful place to go and check to see if you're not fully aware of what your requirements are. And also I've included the more up-to-date changes to carriers, brokers and dealers. These haven't come into place yet, but they are. We are probably likely to get a secondary set of consultation in relation to this, certainly including guidance that will add and update the current statutory guidance for waste duty of care. So this gives you an indication that although the EPA 1990 has been around for a long time, Waste and Resources keeps changing, so it's always worth keeping an eye on what's going on. So even though you might think you know about duty of care, I think it's always worth going back and checking that there haven't been any fundamental changes, because there are tweaks here and there, as you've seen, and obviously that's becoming a fundamental change for carriers and brokers, which you will need to be aware of. Right. Now, the next area I sort of suggested to Ebenezer that might be useful for you to know about are the simpler recycling changes. These obviously just been announced in the last couple of months. We've had the consultation for this a few years ago. It's taken a while for DEFRA policymakers to give us the final indications of what's going to happen. But the changes are that food waste collection is going to be a mandatory requirement. And it's not just for households, it's a mandatory requirement for businesses. So if you have any food waste out of your risings, they will have to be collected separately. Dry recyclables, again, are, although most businesses have quite an extensive dry recyclable scheme, because obviously it's cost effective for you not to put it in the residual waste, because unlike householders, you pay for each component of your waste. So for residual waste, you will be paying, what is it, about £130 landfill tax per tonne, so pro-rated down if it's not a tonne. So consequently, it is very cost effective for you to think about what paper, card, plastic and other materials that you have in your waste stream that can be recycled, because you don't pay landfill tax on that. You will still pay for the service for collection, but you won't pay the landfill tax. So some dates to be aware of. Businesses, and I gather most of you, I think, are from businesses, and other relevant non-domestic properties or organisations, and that includes hospitals and schools, have until the 31st of March 2025 before these requirements come in place. Households have until March 2026. Micro firms, which I believe is under 5 personages, have until March 2027. The only change to the dry recyclable list is a separate collection of plastic film. And that's basically a requirement for everybody by March 2027. Now, plastic film, if most of you have ever tried to sort of put this in a pot or a bag or a box, you realise it's actually quite a difficult stream to manage. Now, unless you've got a large amount of it and you can compact it in a baler, it's quite a nightmare for most organisations on a small scale. There is work being done on this for household level, and some of that learning probably will help businesses, but it's going to be quite a difficult stream for many people to collect. And that's one of the reasons I think it's been given until 2027 for consideration, alongside the other key changes for food waste collection. So what does this mean? I know a few of you are local authorities, so I'll basically split this out. So for local authorities, what the regulations for simpler recycling does mean is you can still commingle dry recyclables if that is what you do. There is no mandatory requirement to separate into separate streams. If you already carry out curbside sort for dry recyclables, you can do that. You don't have to commingle, and if you commingle, you don't have to do a curbside sort. So basically, DEFRA have tried to make it easy enough for one, local authorities, and two, householders to not have too much of a fundamental change to their collection scheme. Food waste collection has to be weekly, and those that co-collect garden and food waste from a local authority point of view have to seriously consider what this means for their scheme. Because if you do co-collect, it means you have to co-collect garden and food weekly because you've got food in it. So the question is, do you take that food waste out? That then means you've got another collection stream, and obviously connotations of that, of vehicles, containers, etc. So it's a key fundamental thing for local authorities to have to consider if they do co-collect garden and food waste. The issue as part of the consultation included whether there should be a charge for garden waste, and they were trying to basically consider whether it should be dropped completely so that everybody had a free garden waste collection. Throughout the country, there is a mixture. Some local authorities charge, some don't. Some charge a reasonably sort of lower charge than others. Some are actually a lot more expensive than others. Through the consultation, it was determined that the waste, garden waste, can still be determined by the local authority to be charged for. So it can be charged for. It's not, it must be free, and it's not, it must be charged for. It's down to the local authority to decide whether they put in a charged garden waste service. So if you're already offering a free garden waste collection service, then there's obviously no reason why you need to change that. If you can afford to budget for it, that's the main thing. It's usually down to a budget and the cost of actually running that service. Obviously, this means in March 2027, there is going to be a new stream within either the dry recyclables or separate to your current dry recyclable collection for plastic film. There has been conversations about whether sort of bring banks can be used to accommodate dry recyclable collection instead of having it done at the curbside. It's not something that DEFRA feels is a way to handle these waste streams. So it's not something that you're allowed to do. It may be something you have as an extra, but it's not something you can say we're just going to have bring banks for plastic film, for example, and everything else will be collected at the curbside. That is something that will not be part of a situation that they will accept. So what do you have to think about next? For local authorities, yes, containers and vehicles are going to be a massive rethink. Certainly if you don't have food waste at the moment, and if you have co-mingled garden and food. Obviously, you also then have to consider your containers and vehicles and all these other options I've got here up to and beyond March 2027, because they all impact. So You will have to look at your rerouting, because obviously you could end up with limited tonnage on your vehicles, which means you then have to reroute and maybe take some houses out, completely reroute everybody on a particular round, which obviously means there's communications and everything else. So it's quite a big rethink for local authorities. Also, again, we may be thinking about how already to collect this film. How are you going to do it? Because again, it's got to go into your contract negotiations. You've got to have these conversations with your collection operators to then say, right, okay, what can you offer me? How can we do this? What's it going to cost? And then obviously considering, certainly from a collection to a disposal local authority, what's the composition change going to mean? Because obviously if you take some of these materials out and some of your material goes to an energy from waste plant, your calorific value changes because you've taken out the plastic, certainly from post 2027 of March. So again, some things to think about. It's not going to be easy answers, but certainly things we need to consider. So what does this then mean for others that aren't local authority? I think one of the things you do need to think about are your current waste arisings, because do you know what you have in your waste stream? Do you know what these changes will mean? Because again, like I say, food waste has to come out. So you then have to look at, how do you then segregate these streams? How are you going to do that? How is it going to be stored, maintained in your depot, your office, courtyard, whatever it is? If you've got a joint building, how is that? Having those conversations with the operator and the building management team, you need to think about these things. Then, of course, you've got to train your employees, because you're going to change the system. You're then going to take food out of your waste stream, and you then got to obviously train your employees to understand what the changes are and why they're having to undertake them. Because obviously what everybody wants is a nice clean stream of dry recyclables and food waste. We don't want contamination. We don't want people to just think, oh, can't be bothered, I'll just stick it in there, it doesn't matter, because it does, makes a big impact. And obviously, like I say, you need to engage with the contractors, whether that's through your building management team or whether it's you directly. You need to engage with them to understand what they are going to offer you, what you think you need. I think it's not just a case of they tell you what they are going to give you. It might be, if you understand exactly what your waste streams are and how you want to handle them within your organisation, you should be telling them what they should be offering you. And if they can't do that, maybe that's then where you need to look at somebody who can offer what you need. And of course, you've then got a budget for all these changes as well, because any changes you make obviously will have a cost, and you need to start thinking about the budgets within the organisation. What else must change? You will obviously have to have an update on your waste transfer note, because obviously once you're segregating food waste out, you then have to describe that food waste and code it. You will then have to consider what containers you need within your office, within your courtyard, or wherever it is your material is collected to a point before it's taken away. You need to understand what your internal processes are, and obviously then determine how that they are going to work so that the material goes to the collection point as it should do. And again, like I say, contract renewal for businesses, this is quite interesting, because most businesses, for a contract for waste, it's on an annual basis and it's done through the waste transfer note. But there are issues with, if you try and make a change too early, the operators can get quite pinicky about it. But obviously they may come to you and say, well, we're going to change this, and you might not, and they might sort of say, we're just going to do it. So I think there has to be some negotiation on both sides about what happens with the contract. Although it's only an annual and it's only based on your waste transfer note, I still think there is opportunity for negotiation about what your particular requirements are and what they should be able to supply to you. And obviously, again, understanding what the statutory guidance means, and looking at what simpler recycling means for you, because obviously you will have to follow the statutory guidance. It's not actually been drafted yet, but it's coming. So again, you need to understand what it is and when it comes out, and scrutinise the information so you're all fully aware of what the situation is that you need to do. So that's the gist of those. Again, as I did for duty of care, I have done a couple of links that will help you. The consultation outcome gives you a summary, and that's where I've got most of this information for what you need to think about. So obviously, please do check that out, because I think it's quite useful. We did a webinar on the reforms. It's a very simple overview about what some of those changes will be. It doesn't necessarily give you the answers, but it does make you think about perhaps what other people are considering. And you're not the only one in this particular situation. You know, everybody's having to think about it all at the same time. And I think that's my last one. So thank you for listening to me. One thing I have done also, as I said at the start for duty of care, is obviously CIWM does have, as you'd expect, being a professional body, we try and ensure that members certainly and those in the sector are fully aware of what they need to do. So we do have particular training courses for virtual and e-learning. So hopefully that will be useful to you as well. And again, the links are there. So if anybody really needs to know a bit more detail, because I have very, very briefly gone over duty of care, you may need to think about catching up on a little bit of education and information. Thank you, Ebenezer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tina. And yeah, thank you for obviously the time and putting the presentation together. Tina has agreed to share this presentation with me, and I will intend, or we at Slipper will intend share it with everybody else on the call and anybody else who couldn't make it. And of course, the video will sort of go on a YouTube channel as well. But wanted to open the floor for any questions. Tina shared a lot of information in there. Any questions at all from anyone on the call?
Yes, thank you, David. It was a season ticket. Thank you. I mean, my brain just went completely at that point.
Yeah, please go ahead, David. I can see your hand is up.
Thank you. I was just wondering about the what appears to be the increasing challenge with managing batteries and waste electricals more sustainably.
Yep.
How do you feel that that's gonna? It feels like we're not raising to the challenge fast enough on that.
Yes, probably. And I know that there are obviously, those that are very heavily involved in which is waste electrical and electronic equipment and batteries, are obviously doing some sterling work in that area. But obviously, yes, there are others that probably don't realise they've even got that particular waste stream, and hence why duty of care to me is you're looking at everything that you produce. So there will be batteries, because I'm sure people, if you've got certainly an old version of a mouse like me, it's got a battery in it to give you that connection. If you've got it plugged in, it's not hardwired. So consequently, there will be some of those waste streams arising. But I know that if you're more heavily involved in that, there are moves next year, because we're now at the end of this year already, to reassess the WEEE regulations and batteries. So there's going to be a massive piece of work from a policy point of view and a regulatory point of view, looking at updating those particular regulations. Part of that's because we've left EU. So what do we need to change specifically because we've now left the European Union? Do we? We may not have to. But again, it's obviously looking at part of our process is looking at how we manage it, but not export everything. And I think that's a key part of that decision, because we probably haven't got as much processing capability as we probably could do, because it was not I won't say it was nice and easy, but it was easier to send it to Europe because they did have that set up, because obviously in Europe it's easier to move stuff around than it is for us to stick it on a boat, because they have to drive it in a lorry, so that's nice and easy, but we have to put it on a boat. They probably would have had the paperwork for doing export, and again, export of batteries and stuff like that, because it would be classed as hazardous waste, is a little bit more tricky. So it's things to have to think about. So yeah, it's all in the mix at the minute, because we know it's going to change.
Yes, I was thinking more as well. At Wastebuster, we do kind of environmental education, engaging the consumer and citizens. So I was more thinking about the £600 million of damage estimated to the waste infrastructure a year, because citizens and businesses don't understand that it needs to go into those wonderful management routes you just talked about. So, but if it doesn't get there,
that's what I mean. If you understand what you've got, so if you don't know that you've got batteries in your residual waste stream, why don't you? You should do, and that to me will be it won't be an official breach of duty of care, but to me it isn't a breach of duty of care because you've not followed that particular regulation, and that's that guidance, because the guidance says you need to know what you have and manage it appropriately to what that stream is. And yes, as we know, we've had quite a few issues with lorries going, catching fire, and that's even before we had the increase of batteries that we seem to have now, because people don't think a toothbrush has got a battery in it. It does, because you recharge it every time it runs down, unless you've got an old-fashioned toothbrush. But those people that have got electronic toothbrushes, yes, it does have a battery in it. Yes, it should be handled appropriately, so it shouldn't be thrown in the bin. And that, I think, is the message. And again, part of our problem is we assume people understand this, and then when you find out that people don't realise they have a battery in an electronic toothbrush, you kind of think, what level of information do we need to think about? And that's probably where we have fallen a bit foul in the resource and waste sector, because we kind of think people should know this, but they obviously don't. So yeah, we need to do a bit more work on that. Hopefully, with my behaviour change group that I now have within CIWM, we will try and sort of set up how we can get messaging more appropriately across, maybe on particular waste streams or on nearly every waste stream, for people to then understand that they should be thinking about where these items are going. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Tina, for that response. We have Mike as well, whose hand is up. Mike, please go ahead. I believe Mike is from the Northamptonshire Natural History Society.
Not on mute, is he? Because I've done that before now.
Yeah, I think you must be on mute, Mike, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Whilst we wait for Mike, can I go to Alexina? Alexina? Okay, I think Alexina might be on mute as well. Alexina? Right, okay, I'm not sure what's going on. Right, we also have, okay, so Alexina is not on mute. The sound doesn't seem to be working. Okay, hold on a second.
You might know you've got settings, perhaps.
Yeah, let me just, Alexina, can you try again, Alexina?
Yes, hi, can you hear me now?
Excellent, I can hear you now.
Thank you. Thanks, Ebenezer. Thanks, Tina, for a great presentation. I just had a quick question on the simpler recycling changes coming through. Yep. There's a 2-year gap between the date for businesses, 31st of March. Sorry, you're wincing. And then there's
it's all right. No, it's obvious.
2 years to micro firms. Do you know, I can look it up. Do you know what the definition is there of a micro firm? Is it a revenue? Is it an amount of employees?
I'm pretty sure it was. I'm pretty sure it's something like less than 5 people. I would have to double check, but it is only it's the very small designation that they use for normal business specification. So they've not changed it anything differently. So I'm pretty sure it's like if you've got under 5 or something like that, it is very much having like a independent consultant that's got an office, or it's 1 or 2 people that work in a partnership. So it is very much based on the very small level of operation. But yes, it's in the link there. But like I say, I'll have to double check off the top of my head. But
that's fine. Sure it sounds like
less than 5.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Alexina, and thanks again, Tina. We've got as well Eluned from Northampton North.
Yes, hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. Yes, I'm often responsible for organising events, and which involve the use of disposable cups and plates. And it's a nightmare trying to source ones that are actually recyclable. And often I come across ones that say they're recyclable, but then they're only recyclable in a few places throughout the country. That you can't put them in your domestic waste. So is there a place you can take them to near Northampton, or do they just have to go into the normal waste and not be recycled?
There are, like you say, there are a number of organisations that produce recyclable And again, some people have changed, because the big problem everybody's gone is on a knee-jerk reaction for plastic, which frustrates me, because there's nothing wrong with plastic if you recycle it. It's just the same as having paper. Paper could be a nightmare if you don't recycle it. So the knee-jerk reaction for plastic meant that people were then looking at alternatives. But then, of course, the alternative still has to go somewhere. So whether that's wood or it's bamboo or it's cardboard or something else. So it doesn't matter what you do, whether that cutlery is plastic or another, it will have to have an outlet and it will have to have a route to get there. There is the option for some places have done compostable plates and cutlery and other bits and pieces like that. So again, that's another option to consider. I know, again, this will depend on the collection system you use. Some will allow that type of material to go into the food waste collection, but you would obviously need to check that depending on who it is and where that material then is going. So whether that material then goes to an anaerobic digestion plant or a composting plant, because anaerobic digestion may have a little bit more difficulty processing it, but again, it depends how it's been set up. So it's always worth checking with whoever it is who's going to be removing that material for you. I'm fully aware that, yes, some places don't recycle those particular items, but that should become a little less of a problem with simpler recycling, again, depending on what it's made of, because obviously those types of streams are now being considered. So if it is, say, plastic and it's recyclable plastic, it shouldn't be a problem, because hard plastic should include things like plates and cutlery, because it's the same plastic whether it's formed into a bottle or whether it's formed into a knife and fork. Again, it will then determine whether that particular operator will then have to deal with separating out those materials through their own processing system. But simpler recycling should allow for some waste streams to be kept up that aren't at the moment, depending on what that material was made of. So it's always worth looking. And again, it's probably worth just checking what operators can take the material you're thinking of having, because that will make quite a big impact.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. We've got Mike as well,
Right.
whose hand is up.
Can
We can hear you,
now?
Mike. Yeah,
Right.
we can. Excellent.
I'm not sure what happened then. We had multiple Teams programs running for some reason. But what is the situation for very small organisations? I represent two charities, one of which we do generate a sufficient waste to have collections. The other, basically, we take it home and put it on our domestic collection.
I didn't hear that. I hope that if there are any local authorities on the call, but they've just gone la 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 la. Right, yes, duty of care. That's one thing you shouldn't do under duty of care, is if it's domestic, if it's office waste or charity waste, whatever, business waste, don't take it home. Or if you do, don't tell anybody you do that. No, it's something you shouldn't do, because obviously it's the waste that has arisen in that particular organisation. So it's that organisation's waste, and there should be a mechanism for handling that material. So whether you then determine you've got, again, it depends on how you're set up. Are you part of a larger charity base that has another office within, say, the town, that you can then take that material to, because they do have a waste collection system. So they may, because they have more arisings at that particular office. So that is certainly something I believe under duty of care is completely legitimate. Or the same organisation, you are just basically taking that material to another office for it to be then stored and collected as one stream from that one organisation.
Yeah, we're basically a micro charity,
Yeah.
So we've got no employees. The only waste we generate is basically from wrappings and the like that we bring in with us. So
right, yes, that's you're one of those tricky ones. I had one very similar to this. They basically had an office that was paperless, and one local authority didn't quite believe that, because even though they were in the office, 2 or 3 of them in the office every day, most of the material they brought in was like their lunch, which they took home with them. They didn't make tea on the office because they didn't have a canteen or kitchen or anything like that. I would say then it's an interesting one. It's probably something I would probably have a conversation with you off this call, because I think I would need to understand a bit more detail exactly what you've got to then determine the best route for you to handle that. It's not one I can probably answer here without knowing a little bit more information. So if that's all right for you, do email me at tina.benfield@ciwm.co.uk, and I'll have a conversation with you to find out exactly what it is you've got and how you're handling it at the minute, and maybe whether we can find a solution to that.
Right, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Tina. And you know, I think we can. I'm sure others might have questions when they obviously leave this session, and we can provide your email, Tina, and in our email for anyone to sort of get in touch. Anyone in the Slipper network to get in touch to discuss any pertinent issues or to ask any follow-up questions, you know, that they may have. So yeah, thank you so much, Tina, for this presentation. And of course, it's very, very important because it's you know, it sort of helps us to cover the very, very, very basics around duty of care. And the reason why we're putting on these webinars as part of the TANZ project is, of course, to sort of ensure that we have the right information with which to reduce those carbon emissions that we generate that comes from the waste that we generate. And so with this initial basic covering of the duty of care, we can in further webinars move on to look at other subjects such as waste minimization, for instance, you know, in terms of the sort of things that we can do if we're a business or a charity, you know, to reduce and to lessen the waste that we generate, and also looking at cost management, right? What are some of the effective strategies to reduce you know, costs associated with waste as well, because of course, as we work to bring down the emissions that we're generating in a push towards net zero, we want to ensure that that's also reflected, you know, financially. So that's something that, of course, we will cover in the future as well with Tina and others, our partners at CIWM. And then finally, I think George has his hand up. Before I go to George, just finally to say that the carbon calculator that we are developing as part of TANZ, which will be open source and available to everyone who's on this call, and also to local businesses that are part of the TANZ project but are not on this particular call. We're developing this to allow you to input some limited waste management data. So you'll be able to put into the calculator some figures and some data around the waste that you generate, and it will sort of factor that in calculating your emissions, etc., etc. And of course, as we go through the project, starting next year, we'll begin doing workshops and webinars on the calculator itself and how to use it, including all the different aspects of it. But let me hold fire there and go over to George from Contain the Flame. Are you there, George? George? No. Okay, I think George has gone off. But I think if I just looking in the chat box, Tina, George had a question. He says, we produce renewable fuels as a business. If we wanted to apply for licensing to recycle certain wastes, example, cardboard, paper, wood, what will be the process for this? Oh, George is back. Over to you, George. Are you there, George? Okay, I think he's gone off again. I think he's having some issues there. Okay, in the interest of time, then, would it be okay, Tina, if I connected you with George
Yeah, because I think I need to understand what he means by licensing to recycle that. Does he mean to put that into his renewable fuels? I need to understand what he's thinking there. Yeah, that's from that question. I'm not 100% sure. I need to ask a couple of questions to clarify what he means. Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So I'll connect you with George, and then obviously you can have that conversation offline. So, ladies and gentlemen, this will be our final TANZ webinar for 2023. So obviously the next TANZ webinar will be in late January 2024. What we'll do is we will release the dates in advance for the upcoming webinars, especially for the first quarter of next year. But seeing as it's the last time that we're sort of meeting on here like this, and I know it's quite early, but it's never too early, in my view, to wish someone a Merry Christmas. So from myself and everybody at Slipper, just want to wish all of you a very, very Merry Christmas to you and yours, and a Happy New Year. And may 2024 bring fantastic progress for all of us. Thank you very much for joining us, and wish you all the best, and see you in January. Take care.
Take care,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.